Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we are going to talk about the latest meta announcement from Fantasy Flight Game, where they decided to ban fourth throw. So this video is sponsored by Card Market, the best marketplace to buy and sell cards in Europe. So, toward the latest announcements, fourth throw will be suspended from the 22nd of September onward. That means if you have a PQ this weekend, fourth throw will still be legal, so you're gonna have one last chance to get to play this card and have fun with it. That probably means I'm probably gonna be skipping the next week's meta analysis because, to be quite honest, fourth throw is gonna change. The fourth throw ban is changing the meta in such a deep way that I don't think it's relevant anymore to make analysis about the current meta because it's going to be so different from the meta we're going to have after this ban. It's the first non-yellow cards to be suspended, which is kind of fun, even leaders included. There's never been a non-yellow card ban so far, so it's kind of interesting. And there hasn't been any other changes, despite many speculations from people wanting bans or unbans. There hasn't been any other changes than just fourth throw being suspended from Premier play. So first, let's talk about what I consider to be the positive with this ban. The first one is that this was by far the most effective way to shake the meta in terms of amount of cards to ban and the impact that it would have on the game. Fourth throw is by far the most effective way to shake the meta. We've now been playing with this meta for over 2 or 3 months, so even though I don't think it is necessary, having a completely brand new meta for the upcoming events, for the big sector qualifiers and regional qualifier, is going to be something very exciting. There's going to be a lot of interesting things to try out, and it's going to be super interesting to see how the meta evolves without fourth throw in the game. And so that's going to be very exciting by itself, and maybe that this by itself is enough of a justification for the cards to be removed. The second positive aspect of this ban is that a lot of people considered fourth throw to be very annoying to play against. People didn't like their leaders being killed for one resource, no matter how much it cost otherwise. People didn't like having their cards stripped away from their hands. And more importantly, and myself included, didn't like being fourth throw multiple times in a row, because playing around fourth throw is usually not that difficult, but playing around 2 and sometimes even 3 fourth throws is a completely different story. Another positive aspect is that it should definitely put red back in line with the other colors. So on this one, I'm a little bit more kind of like whatever, because I think that no matter what you do, there's always going to be a color that's going to see more play than others. Right now, with fourth throw, there were about 73% of decks were at least one red. If you look at the Daredevil meta, about 70% of the decks had at least green. So you see, you can have a very healthy meta and have one of the colors being over 70%. I don't think that's necessarily a major argument in favor of saying that the meta was bad, but once again, it's still better, I would say, to try to as much as possible to align the colors together. I don't think it's the main argument in favor of banning fourth throw, but it is nevertheless an argument, and it definitely is going to put red back in line with the other colors. But once again, we might just end up in the same situation as we were, where green is going to take over the game with over 70%. Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? I don't really care. For me, what really matters is the deck diversity and the different playstyle diversity. For me, those are the two most important things. The color diversity, yes, it's important, but it's not necessarily the most key aspect. Moving on to the negative and the risk of the fourth throw ban, because there are a few. And the first major risk, I think, with the fourth throw ban is like, despite its flaws, the fourth throw meta was one of the most diverse meta we've ever had in the game. So in my previous video, I said that the fourth throw meta was the most diverse meta ever made. It depends on what you mean by diverse meta in terms of leader diversity and in terms of In terms of playstyle diversity, I think it is the most diverse meta. In terms of color diversity, as I said, it's slightly less balanced than the previous one. Once again, the people have different opinions on what they consider to be a diverse meta. In terms of card diversity, the fact that Thorrk was seeing so much play definitely also was putting some people off as well. But once again, it was, whether you think the previous meta was more diverse or this one was more diverse, it's kind of up to debate. But nevertheless, I think nobody can deny that the meta that we had in set 5 was very diverse. And once again, that's not an opinion, it's just fact. When you look at the diversity of different decks, even if you look within the different 4-throw decks that were part of the meta, there were a great diversity of them. You could play a 4-throw mid-range deck, you could play 4-throw tempo aggro deck, you could play a 4-throw control deck. It was playable in both heroism and villainy. And even outside of the 4-throw decks altogether were only representing about 38% of the meta. Everything else was a wide variety of different stuff. You could play Out Control. For the very first time, we had a combo decks that was actually competitive, which might not be competitive after the 4-throw ban. So I think in terms of, it was undeniably a very diverse meta. Whether you like that meta or not, that's up to your taste. And the main risk here is that there's no guarantee that the post-ban meta is going to be better. I can tell you right away, there's going to be a lot of decks that are not going to be as good anymore. There's going to be some decks that are going to be a lot better. Everything is going to be shuffled around, and it's going to be interesting to see and to find out if we think that the meta after the ban is going to be better than the old one. We're going to have to wait and see. Personally, I cannot predict this one way or another. And we're gonna have to wait and see and find out what happens. Next, one risk is that it's possible that false decks might disappear from the tier 1 and 2, at least from the tier 1 and 2, which would invalidate a big part of set 5. So this is something I've said before and I'll say it again. There's no guarantee that false deck will exist after 4-throw is banned. If you pay attention to the false decks that were competitive in the meta, they were all kind of on the back of 4-throw. Some people were saying that's the reason 4-throw needs to be banned. But yeah, do you prefer to have false decks that play 4-throw, or do you prefer to have no false decks at all? My opinion is like I would rather have false decks with 4-throw rather than no false deck at all. Once again, it's not a definitive statement. Very smart whoever can predict what's going to happen. But personally, I think that there's a very, very high risk that this might occur. Once again, it's not guaranteed, and we might end up in a situation where there's a new emergence, the meta favors a new type of decks, and there's going to be a new array of playable false decks that maybe don't play red, or maybe play red despite not having 4-throws. We're going to have to wait and see. That's going to be a pretty big question mark. For sure, false decks are going to be a lot worse. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to disappear. We'll see what happens. But it is definitely a big risk, that's why I wanted to point it out. Let's talk about the thing that didn't get banned. There are two major cards that a lot of people were expecting to see being banned. The first one was so I'm not going to talk. So first of all, I just want to mention the fact that, generally speaking, whenever you're making a ban, it is better to be as surgical as you can be. What I mean by being surgical is being very selective and really remove the core of the problem. And the reason for that is because more often than not, banning multiple cards at once is a mistake, because you are changing two parameters at once, and you lose control over the outcome of your ban. Yeah. So the more you change, the more you lose control over what's gonna happen. If you have a meta and there is something that is problematic in it, you should change what is the core, the source of the problem. If you're changing too many things and you're trying to make bans by anticipations, by trying to predict what's going to come after, you are basically taking the risk of losing control over what's going to be the outcome of your ban. So the more selective you are, the more controlled the outcome is going to be, and the more predictable the outcomes of the ban is going to be. So in this case, they only ban one card. So in this case, it's going to be a lot more predictable that you've produced a new meta that is actually better than the old. But if you make a bunch of changes, you are shuffling everything around, but you're completely losing control over the outcome. So with that being said, so on this basis alone, I always prefer FFG to do only one ban at a time rather than binding multiple cards at once. Unless, once again, there's a very obvious reason not to do that. So a lot of people were advocating for Attacking Town ban. I don't think it was necessary simply because without 4th row, Queenlands and Kylo 5 are going to be a lot worse already. I don't think there's a need to further make those decks further unplayable by taking out Attacking Town as well. I understand that certain play patterns with Attacking Towns are problematic, but with Queenland and Kylo 5 being a lot nerfed, Attacking Town in general in the meta is going to see a lot less play. The only deck that is untouched right now that uses Attacking Town is going to be Cad Bane, and I don't think Cad Bane need a nerf. About Data Vault, of course, with the ban of 4th rows and the definitely a dial down of all the Force decks, Data Vault is undeniably going to come back as the most played base. I think that we're going to come back to a Data Vault meta after this change. I think this is pretty obvious. The question is that really a bad thing? So from that argument, a lot of people will say, well, you need to ban Data Vault alone. But once again, it's not necessarily because a card is the most played that it necessarily needs to be banned. I think that the Data Vault meta was really good. It produced a lot of very fair mid-range decks that I think are positive things for the game. It also increased the amount of cards in your decks, which I think produces better games as well, because it makes it so games don't look alike as much, because you have a more diversity of different cards you can draw every game, which I think is positive. So I don't think that a meta dominated by Data Vault is necessarily a bad thing. Something that people need to really understand is that no matter what you do, there's always going to be a stronger strategy. There's always going to be a best base. So you can ban all. So just simply going ahead and banning all the best cards in the game is not a good way to balance a game. And it's not. And keep in mind that every time you're banning something, you're also removing a card out of a game, a card that people have collected, a deck that people have built. So aggressively banning every strong card in the game is not something that is a good thing to do in a physical trading card game, and it doesn't necessarily produce better outcome in terms of metagame as well. So people need to stop suggesting a list of ban lists made out of 5 cards or more than that. Sometimes they need to chill out and just be, once again, we need to be selective about what we ban, and no matter what you do, there's always going to be a better strategy. There's always going to be a better most played base. The question is not, is this a problem that something sees a lot of play? The question is how healthy is the meta? That's the only question that matters to me. My opinion overall on this, even though I've given my opinion throughout this video, but here I just really want to say personally how I feel about this ban. And as I said many times, I would have been fine either way. I would have been fine with FFG do nothing, and I've been fine with FFG banning the card. And personally, I'm really excited for the new meta. I'm excited for the new options, the new possibilities that are going to come out of this ban. There's going to be, of course, a whole bunch of old decks that are going to come back. There's going to might be some new decks that were enabled by the new set, but that didn't get to shine because they were overshadowed by false decks that might also emerge. That's definitely something I'm going to be looking for. So overall, I'm pretty excited about it. And once again, as I said many times before, I said I would have been fine either way. I didn't have a strong opinion on whether it should be banned or not. I think both options are on the table, and it's very difficult to predict whichever is the best. However, I was quite adamant on the fact that I didn't want to see anything else being banned. I think I've said that 4th was the only ban I was okay with, And I'm glad they didn't ban or unban anything else. I've suggested in the past an unban of triple Dark Raid, but with the recent spoiler of Fulminatrix, I think triple Dark Raid unban would have been unwise, so I think that I'm glad that they didn't unban anything else. I still think we didn't need it a ban. This is something a lot of people are kind of like confused about. Is like, I think I'm fine with a ban, but I don't think we need a ban. It's kind of like people kind of don't understand the word needing. Needing means that it's like, it's very, very important that there's a ban. I don't think that was the case at all. I think the meta was pretty healthy. But once again, I understand that many people didn't like to play against 4th row, and if that's the case, then maybe it's a good enough reason for the card to be banned. And as I said earlier, I'm just excited to see what's going to happen next. So now let's talk about what are going to be the main winners and the main losers of this meta change. At least I'm going to try to do my best to predict, because this ban is going to have such a big impact on the meta. Very difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen, but we'll try to give it a try. First of all, of course, all false decks are going to suffer immensely from the ban. Mother Talzin is a good example. So some might argue that Mother Talzin is absolutely playable in other colors. And it is true, you can play Mother Talzin in yellow, but it's a lot worse. And Mother Talzin was already a deck that was kind of tier 2, it was not a tier 1 deck. So when a tier 2 deck gets worse, it's usually not a great news for the deck. Also there's a possibility that Mother Talzin red is still gonna be a decent deck, simply because, False Lightning still exists. But for sure, Mother Talzin is gonna take a setback from this ban. Next we go, of course, Kylo Ren Tarkintown. It's a deck that did not rely on 4th row as much as Mother Talzin, I believe. But it's the combo part of the deck still function perfectly fine. And you can also still play the more control version with ECL or Data Vault. And I think that's completely valid as well. Whether it's so Kylo Tarkintown is definitely getting a big nerf, but maybe Kylo Tarkintown can take advantage of the fact that people are not going to be running anti-Kylo sideboard cards in the sideboards, and maybe Kylo Tarkintown can take advantage of this. So we'll see, but obviously my immediate instinct is that Kylo Tarkintown is gonna suffer a lot from this ban. Then Yoda. Yoda is playable in green, but I feel like if you're going to be playing Yoda green, you are better off playing Rey, because I feel like Yoda is really a card that really benefits a lot from red. It needs we also has the new Rey that was really strong with it. So obviously without 4th row, the deck is going to be a lot worse. Doesn't mean once again it's going to be unplayable, but it's going to be a lot worse for sure. And we might pivot into a world where people are going to be playing Yoda green instead of Yoda red. Next we got Anakin Skywalker. This one is one of these cards, one of these leader that literally cannot play without that, where 4th row was an absolute auto include because you are playing red. So I have a hard time imagining Anakin Skywalkers without 4th row. So for this, it's by far the leaders that's one of the leaders that's gonna be hurt the most by this ban. Once again, doesn't mean he's gonna become unplayable, but that's gonna be a massive nerf for the leaders, that's for sure. And then once again, obviously Quinlan. Quinlan is also, even though he's not red, he's always paired with Tarkintown, and I don't think that's going to change. Meaning that it's a deck that always plays red, and obviously without 4th row, the deck is going to be a lot worse. And I think Quinlan is specifically bad for Quinlan because Quinlan had a lot of card deny, like in combination with Ahsoka, or was really playing this mana, and also with Spark of Rebellion was really playing the discard plan. And in that context, 4th row was particularly nasty. And without 4th row, this entire card discard plan is not going to work nearly as well, which is going to make Quinlan a far less versatile deck. It's going to be a deck that's still going to do pretty well, I think, against mid-range, but might struggle a lot more against more control strategy without the discard package. I mean, they might still play the discard package, but then obviously without 4th row, the discard package is not nearly as good as in other matchups. So it's a deck that's definitely going to take a huge setback. which is not necessarily a bad thing because Quinlan has been meta for a very long time now, back to Twilight of the Republic, so it's not a bad thing that this deck is going to take a bit of a setback. Now let's talk about the winners, about the decks that I think are going to be benefiting the most from this ban. And the first one, we're going to start with the obvious example, Han Solo. Han Solo was one of the most played deck of Han 1, was one of the most played leader of set 4, and this leader went from being one of the most played leaders from a tier 1 leader to being completely absent from the meta, completely disappeared from the meta. Like, we've seen a couple of Han Blue doing a little bit of result. We saw Baton with Han Red managing a second place at PQ Katowice, but I've no... so the meta was so diverse and open that you were still able to play Han Solo even in this sea of 4 throws. But overall, Han 1 has become a completely unplayable leader from this because of 4 throws. It's one of the leader that by far has the most trouble navigating discards, and and 4 throw is such a blowout for Han, and it's very, very difficult for Han to play around it. Basically, in order to play around it, you almost have to not use your leader ability, which completely defeats the purpose of playing that leader in the first place. And obviously with this ban, this leader is going to make a huge comeback. I think Han Blue is particularly interesting because it can enable Anakin double -3/-3 so well. So Anakin Blue is going to be one I'm going to be looking towards. And yeah. Moving on, we got to Rey. Rey is a force leader, so you might think that Rey really benefited from 4 throw, but the truth is that if you were playing a red, white, blue deck, you were much better off playing Han 2 Blue or Anakin, or even Yoda, than playing Rey. However, Rey really didn't like playing against 4 throw because it's a leader that is so incredibly weak to getting one-shotted. It's a leader that when he deploys, he's very weak, doesn't have a lot of stats, but it's only when he's attacked he gets +1/+1. And being able to attack with Rey is such a big deal because it's a 6 life swing. So Rey was one of the leaders that hated the most being 4 throwed and being one-shotted more than any other leader in the game. So I really didn't like that. And also Rey's decks have a tendency to be a bit slower, and it really struggled being outpaced by other like false decks like Han 2 seeing so much play. It was very difficult for Rey because she was getting outpaced a lot. So I believe Rey, and in particular Rey Green, is going to see a lot more play. It's a deck that has received a lot of new tools from the new set, and I think that false decks were one of our worst matchups. So now the false decks are going to be dialed down. Rey is definitely going to be a lot more of a strong option now, I think. Next is Kira. Kira was the most powerful and the most played deck and most successful deck of set 4, and almost completely disappeared from the meta because the deck was simply not doing well against those very grindy false decks. Once again, with the false decks taking a huge setback, Kira might make a comeback into the meta. And then finally Sabine. Sabine was doing fine in this meta, but I believe it's a deck that also didn't like playing against 4 throws. 4 throw being able to one-shot the Sabine was a big deal for only one resource. Aggro decks, generally speaking, didn't like playing against 4 throws because 4 throw, for one, was able to stop them for only one resource. So Sabine, and the fact that you discard your own cards, and especially expensive card, is not really a big deal for... I feel like discarding yourself whenever you're playing against mid-range is kind of a big bummer because you are taking out one of the most powerful cards in your hand. But if you're playing against aggro, discarding a card that costs 7 is really not that big of a deal. So Sabine really likes the 4 throw ban, I think. Yeah. This is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I just want to let you know that you can pick up Falcon for less than €18 on card market. Falcon is, in my opinion, one of the legendaries that's going to increase in price the most. That at least on the one I can think of on top of my head with this nerf, because it's obviously an auto include in any Han 1 deck, and Han 1 is going to see a lot of plays in this new meta. So pick up your Falcon before it's too late on card market. Anyway, thank you so much for following that video. Let me know on the comments below what you think about the bans. I also would like to thank everybody from the previous video because there were a lot of very passionate debates on that video, and I think that overall people have been very civil about it. They were people were not being, despite having some very different opinions, people were pretty civil about it. So thank you for that, and I hope this will continue also on this video as well. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you next time.